Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello and good evening, educators, and welcome to the Twilight Show here on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm very excited today because I've got a guest on that I've wanted to get on for a while and have admired for some time for her child-centered approach, because it's something I feel like I sort of try to use myself, building those relationships. I know that some people don't like us to say relationships because they say, wow, that's too nebulous, what you're talking about. But I feel it's something important. And Ruth Swailes is my guest this evening. Good evening, Ruth. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thanks, Tony. Are you?
Yeah, I think so. It's been, it's the last week, isn't it?
A long term, isn't it? We can see the end. It's nearly in sight.
Light at the end of the tunnel. It really has been. Well, we say it every time, don't we? To be honest, every time. This has been the hardest term, and so on. But yeah, I'd really like to get into early years because I've been quite interested in early years, obviously being secondary myself, and I think something that both Ruth and I are interested in is maybe dispelling a few misconceptions around some things in early years. And I think obviously myself being in teaching for a quarter of a century, but secondary, what I know about early years you could write on the back of a postage stamp basically. So it's going to be really interesting to get into some things. I have got, as usual, I do a little bit of homework. I put together a list. We're not going to go through it as though it's an interview. We're going to have a bit of a chat and see where the chat takes us. But as I said, I'm very interested in some of these issues in early years, particularly things that people may not understand much about. We're going to get into things like play and the importance of play. And certainly I feel even at secondary, students through the years and through the time I've been teaching have lost their downtime, their lunch break time. I remember being at school myself and just wanting to play football, and it just really breaking up the day nicely. So I don't know whether it's the play issue and the downtime issue is maybe a problem going all the way through the key stages. But yeah, I'm certainly very interested in what's going on. So I wondered if, I thought we could maybe start with the misconceptions then, maybe because we Ruth and I
where to begin?
Where to start? So what do you think it is? What do you think are the main things that people are missing when people are talking about early years? What do you think the main misconceptions are?
I think there are many misconceptions about early years. I think there are, I think often people forget that early years is more than reception. The vast majority of early years is actually before statutory school age. And, sometimes there's this perception that, it all starts in reception, but actually it starts, the EYFS, the statutory framework starts from birth. And so I think it's about understanding that child development and that continuum. I think to the untrained eye or to the less experienced eye, it looks very, very different, and it should. And I think if you're not quite sure what it is you're looking at, that can look a bit chaotic, maybe. It can look a little bit, there seems to be a misconception that it's one of those binary things, isn't it? We're either all sitting at tables and it's very, very formal, or we're all swishing around doing whatever we like and it's all discovery learning. And actually, it's early years is not like that at all. So having worked, in education now for nearly 36 years, I can tell you that can probably count on one hand the number of places that I've been where a classroom has been like that, and it's not been good quality. And I think it's about that understanding that there's an educationalist, a famous educationalist called Lillian Katz, and she says, just because it doesn't look academic, it doesn't mean it's not challenging. And I think that's a really important thing to hold on to, because what is challenging for a child at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old is very different to what's challenging even for a child at 6, 7, 8 years old. So I think that there's some real misconceptions around that. And I'm old enough to remember a time, because I'm very old, before the Early Years Foundation stage existed. So I first started my teaching career just after the national curriculum came out. And we were kind of told, well, try and make that work for reception. And it didn't, because young children learn in very different ways. They don't tend to think in silos in subject areas. It's all very holistic. It's, there's a wealth of research to show that children's learning is interlinked, so what can effectively be planned as a geography-based activity for understanding the world will also cover aspects of physical development, communication and language. You'll probably cover all 7 areas of learning. And so to try to think in a way that the national curriculum would expect us to just really didn't work for young children. So over the years, we've seen this recognition that actually it should look different for our youngest children, because their developmental needs are very different. So up until the age of about 6 or 7, we're actually quite egocentric. And I always say to people that, most of us grow out of that, not all of us. But the world revolves around you, and that's because that's how we're hardwired to survive. So we develop what's called proximally to distally. That's physically. So our body starts with its strength in the core. So we develop what's called cephalocaudal, top to bottom, proximal to distal, and your hands and your feet are the last bits that come. And it's the same academically, and it's the same emotionally. So your emotional development starts very much with yourself and your attachment to your main caregiver, and then it develops to your wider family and beyond and beyond and beyond. And so your curriculum has to reflect that in that it's got to be rooted in the child and what they know. Otherwise, it's just meaningless to them. And I think because that looks so very, very different, and I speak as someone who's taught all the way through the primary range, it is very different to year 6 teaching. It's very different even to year 1 and year 2 teaching, but it doesn't mean it's not challenging. And it's incredibly rigorous if you do it right.
Wow. I mean, that even just with what you've said there, it just sets off a little things in my mind about what stage, what problems we have. I have to obviously see it through the lens of what I'm used to, but some of those things you mentioned, even when they get to secondary, is there still, I'm feeling students, some people don't like the saying students, children are showing signs that their mental age is maybe a lot lower than you'd expect it to be, and our expectations are maybe too high. I'm not sure.
I don't think there's anything wrong with having high expectations, and I wouldn't want, when I talk about developmentally appropriate practice, I think sometimes people think that means that we shouldn't challenge children, and that's absolutely not the case, but we should challenge them in a way that is developmentally appropriate to them. And I think what I've probably seen over the last few years in particular is this misconception that we get better at things by doing them earlier, and that, we should emulate practice which happens perhaps further up the school. And it kind of makes sense logically, doesn't it, if you think about it? Well, we need to get really good at handwriting, or we need to get really good at writing, or, equations. So why don't we just start them in reception? But actually, if you don't have that foundational knowledge, if you don't have the prerequisite skills, then what you're effectively doing is building on sand. You've not got foundations there. And so I think, I would hate for anybody to feel that I have low expectations. And having worked in school improvement for over the last decade, I think the schools that I've worked with would tell you that that's not the case at all. But what I do have is an expectation that the practice will reflect the needs and the age and stage of the child. And that's very different to doing things earlier. And I think there's been some really interesting developments lately from people like Ofsted, for example, in their Strong Foundations review. And one of the things that they say is rushing through the curriculum can give the illusion of progress, but it creates gaps. because if those children don't have those key core aspects of physical development, what we call the prime areas: physical development, personal, social, and emotional development, language and communication, all of which sort of build our executive function, then basically we are going to struggle as learners in later life. And that's kind of what we're doing in early years. I spend a lot of time working with people talking about how a lot of what we do with our youngest children is teach them how to be as part of a group, how to exist within a group, how to interact with one another, but also who they are and how they fit in with the world and that sense of belonging. And I'm personally really pleased to see belonging in that new Ofsted framework, because I think if a child doesn't see themselves and where they belong and where they fit in as part of their, either their setting or their school, it's very difficult to get an understanding of how other people might think differently to them, what we call theory of mind. And this is where we get this real disconnect. That's why we get, some of the things that we've got going on in society where people aren't able to see things from other people's perspective. It's really important. And that starts with us right from babyhood, actually.
There's so many light bulbs going off in my head as you speak. When you're thinking about stages of development, which, for example, I'm a science teacher. Because of our curriculum time being so compressed in a lot of schools, we start teaching students GCSE in year 9 effectively. Now, I don't think many students are ready in year 9 for GCSE. I watched my own daughter, and again, I think her school started quite early. I knew that she wasn't ready for it, and she was a summer baby, so she was young for her academic
for a year group,
age. Yeah. So I could see it with her, and obviously, like I said, so many things are making sense about what you're saying. Students who can't step outside themselves, who get so frustrated because you tell them that they're being something and they just simply can't understand how they could be viewed differently to how they think they're behaving. So I don't know if that's something that just becomes more of an issue as they go through.
We definitely need to, we're having to teach a lot of children how to play. And play, you alluded to this before, how lunch times, for example, and break times have shrunk over the years. And, I was interested I know last year there was a teacher tap survey that showed that if you are a child in an area of significant disadvantage, you are significantly more likely to have a shorter lunch break than you are if you're a child in a more affluent area. And that's, teacher tap surveys, obviously, there's a big sample size, but it's not, it's not perfect. No research methodology is really, but I think it raises some interesting questions. And this is something that I'm seeing time and again. And this feeling that actually we don't have time to play, but actually if we skip that stage, the skills that children learn through play, that self-regulation, that executive function, that sense of self, that freedom to try new things and have a go and get things wrong. And there's a lot that children learn, particularly very young children, through the channels of pretend play, where they're modeling the things that they've seen adults do. Any teacher who works in primary will tell you at some point they've heard a child being them in the classroom, and it's absolutely excruciating. You sort of think, well, yes, I do say that a lot, don't I? But this is the child acting out what they know and seeing themselves in different roles. And that is a big part of developing our executive function. And there is extensive research on that shows that children who have well-developed executive function by the age of 5.5 to 6 are significantly more likely to go on to get college degrees. And this is actually a stronger indicator of children's outcomes than being a good reader at 5 or 6, because it stands to reason that if you are a child who can put your long-term needs ahead of short-term impulses, if you can plan ahead and problem solve and reason, all of the things which come from having well-developed executive function, with good teaching, you will do well. And this shrinking of playtime and the squeezing out of time to interact socially, and there are, I know from my own experiences that there are places where even social interaction time is actually quite tightly controlled. I would query whether we're actually doing our job as educators in preparing children for the realities of life. I think about my time in the workplace, and I'm sure you're the same, and I've worked in many different places, And, it's the chit chat as you walk down the corridor. It's the bit between the meetings. Some of the most productive bits of meetings when we were school improvement advisors were the bit where we had a break, went to the loo and had a bit of a chat over the coffee machine. And, it's those kind of things that really matter. And for a lot of children, they're being squeezed out. And I think we need to think really carefully about how we view play and what those perceptions around play are. And, we all have the need. It's a biological drive. All of us play. We play in different ways. If you think about your own life as an adult, there will be aspects of playfulness, in your life, whether that's going to, watch live music, whether it's going to the cinema, whether it's playing games with friends, whether it's socializing. There are playful aspects of your life. You might play sport, for example, but, we still need to do that. It just looks different. And we need to value that because it's what makes us human.
100%. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's sort of blowing my mind a bit. So many thoughts are coming to me. I'm trying to sort of get them right in my head. But something that really occurs to me is it's almost like in early years, you need a really good understanding of the cognitive, can't even say it now, cognitive development.
Yeah.
Maybe to a much greater extent than secondary teachers do. And I'm suddenly wondering, is there a gap in our training? We don't, for example, understand the adolescent brain. I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to
No. I'm really interested in this because I've just had a conversation with a colleague. I'm part of a group where I work for a sort of a group that supports the local authority, and a piece of work that we're doing is a healthy child development model. And they've got to the bit from the 11 to 16-year-olds, and there's some really fascinating research that they're looking into. And these are people who think very, very deeply. This is cross-sector work. It's, health, social care, housing, but also education. It's a real holistic approach. And some of the research that they're looking into in the adolescent brain is just fascinating. It's just a shame we haven't got time to read it all.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've got a very sort of piecemeal understanding of it, if I'm honest. But it just occurs to me that maybe that's where we're missing a trick in secondary. We talk about, we have training on ASD and SEND. We have all sorts of different training on various things, as you can imagine. But how much do we really understand about what's going on in the mind of an adolescent, of a teenager? I don't know. I mean,
I think you raise a really important point. I mean, certainly I'm very old, so when I did my training, a big part of our training was to do with child development, not just actual cognitive development as well, but those links. And even then, when that was a big part of my training, I came out of uni and there was still so much to learn. And I was really fortunate as well. So in the first few years of my career, I accidentally found myself as Senko. And it really was an accident. I took a role in a school. It's a tiny 2-class school. So there's myself and the head teacher. And I'd taken this role to lead early years and key stage 1 and to deputise for the head when he was out of school. Very small school. And then when I turned up, he sort of went, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, the person who did the job before, she was Senko, so you're Senko now." Okay. But that was brilliant for me because I got to learn so much. And I also, what happens in smaller schools as well is, particularly if they're very, all schools are nurturing, but they're very, very nurturing places. It's like a family. And so, I was working with quite a lot of children with some quite complex needs, and I was really well supported by very patient people who came and kindly educated me in what I didn't know. And this is with my background in what I thought was fairly secure background in child development knowledge. And there were so many light bulb moments from speaking to occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, and still now, 30 year later, more than 30 years later, there are still things that I thought, gosh, I wish I'd known that when I was in the classroom. So there are so many links. I think one of the things that we really miss a trick around is our understanding of the link, particularly for very young children. The younger you are, the more this seems to be significant, between the body and the brain. and that embodied cognition that Rosing and Bentz talk about, that a lot of physios and occupational therapists recognise, and how that really impacts on children's ability to read and to write, but also to regulate. So an example I often give is, when you've got that really tricky class on a Friday afternoon and it's been wet play for a whole week, and how there's that feeling of containment, and it feels like the lid's going to burst because you just need to get outside. And I've been that teacher standing in the absolute driving rain thinking we are going outside because we all need to.
I've sometimes taught a class period in the afternoon. I thought, I wonder if my head teacher would allow me to just spend the first 10 minutes walking around the field.
Movement really matters. Movement is a way. Yeah.
But what are the chances of someone coming and watching me do that, and then the sort of feedback I'm likely to get in this day and age where we're so outcomes centered?
But there's a counterintuitivity around it, isn't there? That there's almost this perception that you will be admonished, and you may well be, if there's a lack of understanding of why. If we don't actually get better at sitting still by practicing sitting still, we get better at sitting still by moving and working out where our body is in space. That development of what's called proprioception, which is mapping your body so that actually when you sit down, you've got a real understanding of where your body is, so that you don't have to think about it. And we as adults don't realize that because we've got it. So we'll sit and having a conversation now, and we're not even really thinking about our bodies and where they are. But as a young child, up until about the age of 7 to 8, in neurotypical children, that body won't be fully mapped. So the longer that you expect a child to sit still, the more they're going to end up focusing not on what you're saying, but on keeping still. And you'll probably still see this at secondary. You'll see some children who are sort of holding on to things. They're holding onto the floor. In primary schools, you often see children holding on to chair legs and table legs and teachers' legs. And that's about grounding themselves and trying to work out where they are in that space. And if you've got to focus on that, then your teacher may as well be speaking a completely different language to the one you understand after a while, because you're not listening anymore.
So it's a cognitive overload. You can't.
Yeah, absolutely. Sitting still is cognitively challenging for very young children.
That's really interesting. Now you're blowing my mind, Ruth, this evening. I just want to mention, right, in a minute, I wanted to ask you a bit. I'm going to give you some thinking time.
Okay.
While I mention our sponsors, but I wanted to ask you about how things have changed in early years through the years, and you mentioned before the national curriculum, and because it'd be interesting, you having lived through those.
You sound very old.
Sorry. But it would, of course, not everyone would have done, so it would be very interesting. I just wanted to mention, guys, Hachette Learning. So Ruth and I have talked a few times about CPD this evening. If you'd like some CPD and you want to go and do some reading, maybe about some of the things that we've talked about, then Hachette Learning are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So if you want to level up your professional development today, you can visit their website, www.hachetlearning.com, and explore the full range of titles. I also wanted to mention a couple of events, and one of those being the BET Show, which is the biggest week in education from 21st to 23rd of January 2026, and that's at the Excel in London. They have all sorts of things there: immersive workshops, thought-provoking speakers, hundreds of hours of CPD, accredited content, cutting-edge technology, unrivaled networking. So if you are interested in that, excellent opportunity. You can get free tickets by visiting uk.betshow.com. So uk.betshow, BETT.com, Bet Show. So and then the last one, which is happening in 2026 as well, in March, I believe, Saturday the 14th, is Teachers Talk Connect. That's one that I might be going along to, guys, again. So free tickets. This is in Manchester, this event. So if you're interested in getting some tickets for that, again, there'll be some speakers there, CPD, opportunities for networking, and so on. And that one, if you're interested, go to ttradio.org/connect 2026. So that is that. And coming back to our early years, Ruth. So let's see what the next thing is on the agenda. I was going to ask you, like I said, have things improved when you consider the changes?
I think we've been. I do feel very old because you do go through cycles in education and you see things coming around again. And I always think the pendulum swings in education, and we sort of all swing that way, and we all go running after, and then we all swing back that way. And the reality is that most practice is a lot more nuanced than some of those binary views would have us believe. So I as I said, I was around before there was an early years foundation stage framework. I was around for the original first iterations. We got a lovely blue document with some footsteps on the front called Stepping Stones that talked about development practice. And at the time I was teaching a mixed age class. So I had part-time nursery children, reception children, year 1 and year 2 children. So I was trying to run those two curricula, which was quite interesting. But it really, so that early iteration of that framework really brought to the fore that actually it's different for younger children. It's a bit more complicated. And that first framework that we had 6 areas of learning, and there weren't any prime areas. And so for me, I think sort of like the real pivotal moment in terms of my practice and that sort of sweet spot where I thought, yes, we're finally getting what we want to see was in 2011, the government commissioned a review of the evidence around what we know about how young children learn. Dame Claire Tickell did what's become known as the Tickell Review, which is still available today and is a brilliant read. And what she did was she looked at all of the sort of high quality research that was available about young children's learning and development, but she also looked at the data sets from those original early learning goals. We used to score children on from a 1 to a 9 in all the areas of learning. And what she noticed was that there was something really significant about communication and language, personal, social, and emotional development, and physical development. And it was so stark, this difference, that, if children did well in those areas, they seemed to go on to do well across the board later on, not just in foundation stage, but as they were progressing through schools. And these areas became known as the prime areas for that reason. And that was really significant. It was that recognition that actually these are the building blocks. And what we know about young children's brain development, there's huge amounts of research that tell us that, there is so much going on in the brain in those early stages. Birth to 3, birth to 5 is massive, but, in terms of changes to the brain and brain development. But actually, between 80 to 90% of your brain development is happening between the ages of birth and 3 years old, which is just quite mind-blowing. And when we look at those significant changes, a lot of them are linked to the prime areas because they are time sensitive. Now, that doesn't mean that if they're not in place by the time a child is 6 or 7, we shrug our shoulders and give up. But what it means is that our brain is at its most plastic and susceptible to the development of those areas then in that early childhood. And that's why the primes are the primes. So that was really significant. And also there was a lot of wealth of research around self-regulation, executive function, how children's planning, problem solving and reasoning, their ability to be motivated and engaged, how that really makes a difference to young children's learning. And they were developed into the characteristics of effective learning. And in the 2012 iteration of the foundation stage, those characteristics were really well documented. So there were sort of columns there around, actually, this is what we should see, we hope to see children doing. But then some guidance on, if you're an adult, this is how you can help and support them, which was really, really helpful to us as practitioners. And that iteration of the foundation stage for me was probably the pinnacle, because that introduced what we call our 4 overarching principles, which is that every child is unique, that children learn and develop through positive relationships, that enabling environments support children's learning, and that children learn in different ways and at different rates. And the last iteration of the foundation stage, I felt, I'm going to be honest with you, I felt we lost some of those aspects. The people who were involved in the review were some really, really good people, but not all of them were experienced in even primary education, let alone early years. And so there were some things that I would say were inappropriate. So, for example, there's a real focus on tripod grip by the time a child is leaving foundation stage, which is important, but an occupational therapist would tell you that it's not strictly expected, or necessary for a child to do that. Certainly, the expectations for occupational therapists, if a child's not got a tripod grip by 6, it's not the end of the world. But the way that that framework was written has led to people almost pathologizing what is broadly typical child development. You get children in catch-up programs because they've not got a tripod grip, and you think, well, they're just 4, and actually I've seen people who've really focused on things like that to the detriment of other things, and they've put children off writing. So I see, I still work in school improvement. I still go into year 5, year 6 classes, and I see children with a beautiful tripod grip and the most terrible handwriting.
Can I ask an obvious question?
Yeah.
As to what a tripod grip is.
Okay, so a tripod grip is where you would
hold people who don't know, because obviously I know exactly what it is.
So you would hold your pencil between your 3 fingers, and what happens is, as we were saying before, developing proximally to distally, your development starts in your core, it goes down through your shoulder girdle, up through the pivot in your arm, down to your wrist, into your fingers, and the last thing you get is this dynamic grip. Some people never get that and have beautiful handwriting. I'm thinking of a teacher I used to teach next door to, Well,
I remember for a long time holding a pen kind of like this and not getting it like this until and then I saw someone doing it like that, and I was like, oh, is that how you meant to do it? I don't remember how old I was, but I remember, being able to realise that.
One of our goals now for 5-year-olds, and some of these children aren't 5, they're 4 because they're summer born, is to have a tripod grip. And that can be really problematic. Ideally, you'd like a child to have, but if they're still in the stage where they're in what we call palmar supinate or digital pronate, there are different types of grips that some children will go through, and some children will hold it like this. For me, you might have a pincer grasp. It's about the comfort, and a dynamic tripod grip is supposed to be the most comfortable. It gives you the least fatigue. But if you're constantly correcting a child and they're not developmentally ready for that, it becomes really problematic. And sometimes what people do is they focus so much on this, and you see these people with, children with in juniors with beautiful tripod grips, but the shoulder girdle's so poorly developed that the handwriting's still appalling. But that's not a goal, so nobody looks at that. And we miss that link between gross and fine motor. And I suppose for me, some of those issues around some aspects of the educational programs, some aspects of the changes to the EYFS didn't come from a bad place, but they came from a place of perhaps not understanding all the stages that go before. So I know there were issues around the goals, for example, in maths, where, there was an expectation that children, would have a really strong understanding of number bonds to 10, which obviously we want and we encourage. But there was no research to back up why children needed to know this by the age of 4.5 to 5. Actually, there are other aspects. So yes, that's important. But spatial reasoning, for example, again, is a really strong indicator of children's academic outcomes and mathematical outcomes. And the shape, space and measures goal was taken away. That's really problematic. There were other aspects of it that were really good. So, for example, the subitizing goals. We've been talking about subitizing for years and talking about the fact that, if children can recognize patterns, it's widely recognized in research that children who are good at being able to do that tend to do well. Patterning is a big part of your mathematical development and thinking. So it's not all bad news, but I think the other thing that the DFE did, and this wasn't the people who were involved in the review, this wasn't their fault, this was part of the the remit, was they reduced the length of it. And so what they did with those wonderful characteristics, which used to be really well written and supportive and helped you as a practitioner, they reduced them to 3 bullet points. And if I don't know about child development, that's not going to help me, So I think it's the whole framework is evolving. What it feels like over time is that there's a shift towards making it more like year 1. And, you would think, well, okay, that's ambitious. But actually, if those foundations aren't there, that's really problematic. And it won't surprise you to know that what we're recognising and what we're seeing in schools is that we're seeing an increasing number of children who, for whatever reason, and there are very complex things going on, and this is not unique to the UK, by the way, because I do international work as well, because I wrote the Oxford International Curriculum, and a lot of that involves training. And when I speak to practitioners all over the world, they tell me the same things. Children coming in with motor skills that need more development than they have previously, with some language and communication issues, with issues around PSED, there seems to be a gradual increase in the number of children who are finding these things challenging. And so having a curriculum that almost presumes that those things are in place is really problematic. And I think we have to be really mindful of the fact that if our children's lives outside of school are changing, and they're coming in and they need more support with some of the skills that we may have seen them being quite adept at even 5 years ago, then we need to look at our curriculum and say, is that meeting the needs of those children? And I think this is where, I am, people think I'm very negative about Ofsted. I'm not. There are things about Ofsted that, and I used to be an inspector, so, I've worn that hat as well. I think we do need to be accountable, but I think we need to be accountable for the right things. And I think the new toolkits around inclusion, around meeting the children where they are, I think are quite helpful, because I think this allows us an opportunity to say, well, hold on a minute. If our children are coming in and they've got some gaps, what are we doing to address those? And giving the same curriculum year in, year out and expecting children to go from here to here just by hammering it is not going to work. What are we going to do? So I think there's hope, but I think there's also a lot of fear. I think people are really afraid. And I think some of that comes from people who are not perhaps as well versed in child development as we'd like them to be, making assumptions and making judgments about practice that are not rooted in pedagogical knowledge. Yeah. And that can be tricky.
Which again maybe comes back to training and so on. Yeah, we have actually had, sorry to change the subject slightly, we've had a comment come in, and it does mention parents. So this is Paul Foss. I'm just going to put this on the screen, Ruth, and we'll see what you think. So Paul is saying, do you think schools stress these facts? So I think he might have been speaking about, well, I'm not sure, something we have been discussing earlier. Parental responsibility engagement is so low in our school right now, and I wonder if they know or care about the first 5 or 6 years.
I think, I come from a place of, perhaps I'm naive, but I don't think I am. I spent quite a lot of my career working in and with tough schools, and I sort of don't come from the poshest background myself, so I've seen it all, warts and all. And I think, the vast majority of people really want the best for the children, don't necessarily always want to do the right thing, and there's a lot of fear about doing the wrong thing. So sometimes I would have conversations and people would say, I wanted to help them but I didn't know how, or I wanted to help them but I didn't want to do it wrong. So I think it's tricky and it's tough. I also think that a lot, I wouldn't say that's unique to parents, in that understanding of how important those early years are. So one of my frustrations would be that sometimes parents would say, well, we're taking them on holiday because it's not compulsory schooling, until the term after year 5. We wouldn't do it if they were in year 6. And I'd be like, as if, everything happens in year 6, and it's that understanding of the foundations. But then I'm going to be honest with you and say, we also had teachers who said that, and I get teachers saying, off you go back to your sandpit because all you do is play, so I don't think that's unique to parents. And I think some of this is around the professional discourse and the professional respect that we have for each other. And there is a perception that the younger the children you teach, the easier it is and the less intellectual development you need, because it's only young children. How hard can it be? And actually, it's quite complex.
Well, 100%. And I think, it's the stakes maybe seem to me a bit higher at such an early stage. Understanding cognitive development, teaching somebody to read must just be the most incredible thing. It's something that I can't relate to because I'm a secondary school teacher. They can read, you know, hopefully by the time they get to me reasonably well. But to actually have that, yeah, it's a very different thing. And there's been a lot said on social media recently about parents, particularly with the Mossborn report. And I'm sorry to mention it because it's been so controversial. But regardless of how you feel about it, there needs to maybe be a debate about to what extent we listen and to what extent we try to understand. And I think you're right. I think the majority of parents, the vast majority, want to do a really good job. You have got people who just don't know. You have got people who are working lots and lots of hours. They're working from home. More people are working from home now. Yep. And I think the home is becoming an office.
And those boundaries are blurred, aren't they? When do you switch off, you know?
Yeah, and when do you, yeah. So I think it's very easy to blame. It's very easy to blame, but it's also very easy to feel like you're being blamed.
Yeah, so I think it's a really tricky one. I think, you know, I do a lot of training around this, and I do a lot of training on Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work on ecological systems and how we don't exist in a vacuum, and children don't exist in a vacuum, families don't exist in a vacuum. And I look back to my own parenting experience. So I often tell a story in my training about I was a second-time parent. I'd got a 5-year-old when my daughter turned 5 a couple of weeks after I had my second daughter, and I can remember going to a baby group. And that was run by my health visitor. Nowadays, and this is no slight on health visitors, they're overstretched. Often you don't get to see a health visitor, or, you know, there'll be a phone call. Are you worried about your child? Well, actually, if I don't know about child development, it's my first baby. How do I know if I'm worried about my child? And I remember being in that baby group, and my friend who was sitting next to me, her little girl, Saffron, she rolled over. Now, Saffron was a month older than Hannah. And I remember thinking, oh, crikey, should Hannah be doing that? And this is me with all my years of experience working with young children. I'm on my second child. I'm quite confident. And I went straight to Marion, the health visitor, and went, Marion, Saffron's rolling over. Is Hannah behind? You know, because you've got something to compare it to. And I think we forget that actually a lot of our parents, especially of our younger children, became first-time parents during one of the most significant and disruptive times of our lives. And, you know, I had a midwife coming round. I had my family coming round. I had my friends coming round. I had a big support network around me. I had 2 Sure Start centres on my doorstep that I could walk to. I was barely in the house when I had my children because I was just doing stuff all the time. And I'd got this massive support network, which has sustained me. My youngest child is 19 now, and I still have those friendships with those people. And during the course of my life, when things have been a bit wobbly, when I've needed some advice, I've picked the phone up. A lot of parents, people tell me about, you know, the midwife coming around and putting the scales on the doorstep because they couldn't come in the house. And they look back and they say, you know, I might have had postnatal depression, but I couldn't have a conversation. I couldn't have my parents to visit. You know, my parents didn't hold the grandchild until the grandchild was sort of, you know, 9 months old or whatever. That's a very different parenting experience. A lot of those centres have closed. A lot of those networks aren't there. Health visitors aren't able to do those kind of things anymore. And it's all this thing that we sort of think of as being soft and extra, but actually it's the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's been like you, my 2 children are now at university. It was a long time. I remember a health visitor calling when they were very small. And so, and that's just not happening necessarily now.
And that's not because the health visitors don't want to, it's because they're massively overstretched, like all services. And I think we can't blame parents for this. You know, parents are the product of a wider society, and how are we supporting, you know? So I'm not under any illusions. There are, you know, families, you know, things are trickier. I've supported a lot of those. I started my education journey by volunteering in a women's refuge. So, you know, I've seen many different aspects and the impact that has on children and their lives. a lot of people are working in really and living in really challenging circumstances. Housing is another example where there's this instability in housing, which means that, that consistency that really matters to our youngest children and their families, it's just not there. And so I think, it's easy to judge. It's more complex than we imagine. And I think it's also the case the other way around, where I know from all the wonderful schools that I work with and the teachers that I work with that you are being asked to do more and more and more with less and less and less. And the bar is always raising. And, there's only so much you can do. So I think I find it really tricky, actually, this notion that we're sort of pitted against each other, that it's sometimes, people are, it's either parents or teachers, but actually, the vast majority of people, it's about finding a way to work together, because we've all got the best interests of children at heart, and it's about having that discussion and that dialogue and talking. But I also think we really need to listen as well. And there are times in my career that I think actually I should have listened more. And that's we all do things and we all say things and we all look back with hindsight and think, oh, that could have been better. But I think it's hard when you've not got time to make time for that dialogue, but it matters.
Oh, 100%. And I don't know where this, and I go on about it a lot, but I call it a pressure cooker of expectations, outcomes, focus on outcomes, this sort of laser focus. And someone said to me, and I can't even remember who it was now, a couple of months back, somebody on the show said that education is like an oil tanker. So it's just got this momentum where people have, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Again, through the lens of secondary, from the moment they come in, get them in. There's a do now, and then there's this, and then there's register, and then you've got to do this, and you've got to get that done. And
it's like you're on a treadmill, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's like, when do you actually have, my form come in the morning for 20 minutes, and I've got to do this. I've got to check equipment. I've got to, and I'm not, speaking just about my school. This is a very general thing that we have this pressure, and we're expected to do so many things in order to show that we are working towards this goal with this laser focus on outcomes. I just think we do take our eye off the ball, and I don't really know where that's getting us in this country, and I'm sure other countries in Europe are probably similar, and across the world. It suddenly, I think, where's it going to end when someone's going to finally say, actually, this is wrong, stop, this is wrong.
I think there is a little bit of a movement, and I think some of this it's not, we don't exist in a vacuum, do we? So some of this isn't just about education, this is about society as a whole, and the speeding up of our lives, the expectation of everything being instant. I mean, now sometimes people will send you an email, and if you haven't responded within the day, they're kind of like, I sent you that email, did you get it? And he's sort of like, yeah. And if you really needed me urgently, ring me, or did you know what I mean? It's become an expectation that we're always available. We were talking about working from home and how that culture accelerated during COVID, and we almost can't put that genie back in the bottle, that you're never off, that, oh, well, I'll just go and check my emails, and can you just do this before you come into work tomorrow? And those boundaries are blurred, and things are seeping into other areas. And I think as a society, we are speeding up. We expect things instantly. We expect multiple things to be happening at once, even in the way that TV dramas are written, for example. I remember Sam Wass talking about this years ago, Dr. Sam Wass. If you watch a drama, like Starsky and Hutch, for example, I'm very old, but if you watch that from the 70s, there's one plot line and one subplot. If you watch a cop show now, or a crime drama, there'll be countless different. It's almost like we've got to be constantly engaged, we're feeding that culture.
It's instant gratification, isn't it? TikTok, little clips. There are 30 seconds long, and then you've got this. We all know that one, don't we? But it's memes and it's clips and it's instant gratification.
Somebody said to me the other day, if you can't give me the CPD that I need in 10 minutes, then I haven't got time for it. And I said, well, I'm not being funny. I was sort of flipping it out. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Can you get anything deep and meaningful in 10 minutes? And actually, what about slowing it down and taking a bit of time? And, one of my big mantras that I've used frequently is do less, do it better. you know. So actually, rather than skating over the surface of everything and feeling like we've got to be on this constant treadmill, and curriculum is a classic example of this, we overstuff curricula.
Oh, don't we just?
And you know, often when I'm looking at curriculum, I've done this afternoon with a school, with a federation that I work with, and I'm saying to them, you know, you've got year 1 stuff in your foundation curricula. You've actually got year 2 stuff in there. I've done it in primary schools where there's key stage 3 things in the key stage 2 curriculum. And when we talk about it, it's ambitious. Well, no, actually, it's not, because you're not covering the stuff you need to cover in sufficient depth. And I think this is where a report like Strong Foundations from Ofsted, this is where the new sort of Ofsted framework can help us, that actually what's that foundational knowledge that children really need to have, and get that embedded, get it deep, and then you can accelerate, because actually they've got all the stuff they need to be successful. But if we're constantly trying to hammer so much stuff so early, when do they get to revise and revisit? If we think about as well as cognitive load theory and this idea of spaced practice and spaced interleaving, half the time we don't get a chance to do that because we're so busy going on to the next thing and the next thing. And we get so bogged down in coverage that we forget about the sequencing, we forget about the structure, we forget about the overlearning and the revising and the revisiting and the refining. And so we've covered everything, but have they actually learned it? Not sure.
Yeah,
I'm on a rant there, sorry.
No, you're right. No, I totally agree, though. And it's the same at secondary again.
Yeah.
Key stage 4 things I see pop up in key stage 3 schemes of work, which were in key stage 4. But the amount of stuff, it's only recently that with the curriculum review that there's been hints that they're going to start. I mean, I don't know if it filters down into key stage 1.
Well, this is a bit of a source of disappointment for me, you know, because obviously we're pre-key stage 1. And I suppose my disappointment is that we started with key stage 5 and worked our way back. And actually what we should be doing is starting from EYFS and building up. And saying what is the key core foundational knowledge. And this is, twas ever thus, you know, whenever you get a representative either from curriculum or, you know, scheme or whatever it is coming to your school, you know, you tentatively put your hand up and saying, what about early years? And they say, oh, we haven't done that yet, but you can use key stage 1 and water it down. Well, you can't. And it's not good enough, you know. So we should always start from, you know, and I'm absolutely passionate about this. If we want to get it right, we should start from birth upwards. And we should be learning from each other, and we should be listening to each other, but we should be building on that key core foundational knowledge that children need in order to be successful. And we need to recognize that that isn't just about what looks purely academic. That is about movement. It's about socialization, you know, care. People often say to me, oh, you know, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But actually care is part of our curriculum with our youngest children, you know, learning how to look after yourself, learning how to wash your hands, learning that, you know, you're cutting things up with a knife and fork, you know. And yes, lots of people would say, you know, children should come to school knowing that. Well, if they don't, our job has to be to teach them, you know. And I've you know, I've done that for my entire career. It's not a new thing.
You've got to have that attitude, haven't you? You can't blame the student.
It's never the child's fault.
Child.
Yeah, it's never, you know.
Someone said to me we shouldn't say student.
I don't have a problem with it at all. You know, I don't have an issue. I think we need to recognise. I think we need to remember that they are still children. Yeah. But I also think we need to remember that a 14-year-old is a very different beast almost to a 4-year-old, and we need to respect that and not expect young people, pedagogy for young people, to look the same as it does for older children. And I think one of my my biggest frustrations is the way that the early years sector is almost treated derisively and dismissively by those who've never actually walked the walk. And I just think I would not dream of speaking to anyone professionally in that sense about practice that I've never done. In fact, I wouldn't speak to anyone professionally like that anyway. But I just think, you know, unless you've actually had direct experience of working in that phase, have a little bit of professional respect for the people who have extensive experience, and let's talk, let's discuss, but please let's not, you know, be derogatory about, you know, calling people names because they work in early years.
100%. Yeah, well said. And obviously a lot of what you said is, you know, kind of made me really think, and particularly along the lines of the cognitive development and what you've said, the body and the mind. And I remember somebody just like mentioning that in some training we had, and I can't remember what it was. And I was like, well, what are you talking about, body and mind? And and I suddenly feel like there's probably a big gap in my own. I've been teaching such a long time, and I've sort of come away from this feeling that maybe I do have a little bit of a gap, and maybe that is an area that we need to focus on. And yeah, it's. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
yeah, no, I think it is something, and we've talked about it a lot. I'm quite vocal in my opinions on sort of where I think things could be better, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that this is a criticism of teachers or of initial teacher education, because that is very much dictated by central government. And I think that we lost something when we took important aspects of child development. I think everybody, as an educator, has an entitlement to understanding basic human development, because we are working with humans. And you will have some children in your classrooms who might be, chronologically 14, but cognitively they could be 7, 8, they could even be 4. And, as a teacher, is that fair on you that you're expected to meet that need when you don't have that background and understanding? It's not. So this isn't a criticism of teachers. It's about, where are the gaps and what can we do to address it? And I think, we'd all be a lot better off if human development was part of our initial teacher education.
100%. I just want to mention before I forget, we were gonna maybe talk about a couple of things that could be a bit more controversial. I'll do in a sec. I'm just going to mention one last time, so just be thinking about that, Ruth, for a minute, and what we could say and what we maybe shouldn't say. But
I'm always professionally appropriate.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't expect anything less from you. So I just wanted to mention, guys, again, Hachette Learning. This show is brought to you by in partnership with Hachette Learning, in fact. And Hachette Learning are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And maybe there's some books on cognitive development, and I think I really should go and find one, based on what Ruth has been saying this evening. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. So that's Hachette Learning, guys. Now, I gave you a list of questions, didn't I?
Most of which we haven't covered.
Most of which, I don't know how many we've covered. Every now and again, I've had a little look over, and I think we've covered quite a lot.
Actually, we probably have, yeah.
There's probably things that I could have asked you. So if you do think of anything that you wanted to say that I haven't asked you in a minute, but I also put at the bottom a little section on more controversial questions. I'm not trying to be deliberately controversial, but something we have touched upon is a misunderstanding and the dominating voices. I mean, I use X a lot. I haven't got into LinkedIn. I don't know whether you have, Ruth. Some people say
I use it occasionally, yeah.
I feel like I should maybe get into that a bit more. And I do think you can learn some things, through these platforms, but there's obviously pros and cons. But do you think, I wanted to ask you about an edulad culture. And I've got to be careful in what I mean when I say edulad, and I'm probably just going to end up upsetting some people. But it's it's a word that I've heard. And what's interesting, actually, I looked at some stats earlier about the number of men in early years and primary, and it was about 2 or 3% in early years.
It's very low.
14 to 15% in primary, something like that was the stats that I got. But do you think maybe educational discourse can be a bit dominated by people who are called edulads, which means they tend to be men? Do you think there's a bit of an issue with an edulad culture in the profession?
I think it was a phrase that was probably coined in sort of like a little bit flippantly. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to remember who coined it originally, but it can feel a little bit like the discourse is dominated by. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. People who work in secondary schools, there's almost this perception that if you work in a secondary school, then your voice might be more important. And I think they're all of equal importance. I think that sometimes those dominant voices can be mostly men. And, you know, having done some analysis around this, you know, sometimes the way that women are responded to is very dismissive. I'm not a massive fan of, you know, sort of naming and othering people, but, you know, I have used the term myself, but then I've been called, you know, and that's been in response to being called the EYFS mafia, for example. A hysterical naysayer, a discourse only, what was it? An osmosis only nutter, which kind of implies that we all float around, you know, people referring to me as a nutter, an enemy of promise, because I don't think that, you know, we should necessarily replicate what is formal. Somebody called me unhinged, secondary head teacher called me unhinged because I suggested that we might, you know, incorporate play into some of our practice. So I think some of that narrative is quite problematic. I think what I'd like to see is a degree of professional respect, you know, and recognition that it might not look like what you do, but please respect the fact that what happens in those classrooms, in those settings, often with people who are working on barely above minimum wage, by the way, in some settings, is really complex. And, you know, they are caring for and supporting and educating our most vulnerable children who haven't yet found their voices. So often in early years, there is a bit of a feeling that people in early years are vocal. I've had the word stroppy used. I prefer assertive. And what I often say to people who are new to working in early years is, you are going to have to be quite strong, because if you're in a school, for example, you will be a very small part of a school. You know, so even if you are, you know, like I was once in a 4-form entry primary school, so you've got quite a big department with a nursery, you are still, in comparison to the rest of the school, in the minority. And, you know, it is quite a complex and expert field. And so other people just look at it and use phrases like, you know, oh, if you go back to your sandpit, all you do is play. You know, I can remember quite a prominent person on social media who had the ear of ministers at the time saying, if it's just play and not learning that looks like play, it's hard to justify teachers being paid to supervise it, which demonstrates a really deep, you know, well, a massive misunderstanding of how complex early learning is and the job that we do. And I just think, rather than being dismissive, it would be really helpful if, instead of taking things out of context and, you know, screenshotting what people say and mocking it, let's have a conversation like professional people. Let's sit in a room like we've done. There'll be things that we agree on, there'll be things that we disagree on, but let's talk about it from a professional perspective. Let's listen to one another. Let's see that actually, just because our expectations of what children do at different stages might not be the same, it doesn't mean either of us are wrong. It just means that we're looking at it through different lenses. But actually, I want the highest standards for children, but I know that if we don't give them what they need when they need it, we are going to be setting them up to make life quite difficult. And we're actually going to make your job working in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 harder, because they won't have those core skills. So I think I've gone on a bit of a rant, but I think what I'd like to see is that, rather than dismissing the voices of people who walk the walk every day with a vast range of experience, maybe it'd be nice if we could just have a professional discussion in future.
It would, yeah. And obviously the problem you've got, I suppose, that you'll always have with social media is the lack of nuance and the
absolutely. It's not binary.
No, and the false binaries you get and everything else. But, you know, some of the people who I see on there who are in a particular camp, and I think, well, if you could sit down with this other person, you would probably agree on quite a lot more than you realise you'd agree on. But people have a persona that they feel they need to. I don't know. It's almost
I find that quite odd, actually, this idea that you've got this social media persona. And I suppose that might be me being naive, but, you know, I just say and do what I would say and do if I was in a room with you, you know, and I am of the mind that if I wouldn't say that to someone's face, I certainly wouldn't say it on social media.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? Yeah, and I try and think along a similar lines. Would I say this if the person was in the room? And but when people are using, obviously the language you use is important. If you're using language that tends to be said to women but not men, then you need to think very
hysterical,
carefully.
for example.
Hysterical was a word I picked out of what you said. You know, how many men are getting called hysterical? So it's, you know, people just need to be a little bit more sensible.
Maybe they were referring to my comedic skills, you know. I am very much of the mind. I've got broad shoulders, you know. I am. You know, I've had people, some quite prominent people, come up to me and say, "I don't know how you take it, because what you get is relentless." But I just think, do you know what? If part of me thinks that if people are so sort of determined to try to shut me up, I must be doing something right, because I'm obviously saying something that needs to be said. So, you know, I'm going to keep saying it. And actually, you know, I do remember somebody saying once, you know, you really need to think about, I've had a couple of men tell me, men in early years tell me, I really need to think about, you know, you really want to think about how you talk about early years on social media, you know, because it might ruin your career. And, you know, I can remember my husband, you know, sort of being in the background and hearing that and going, good luck with that, trying to tell her what to do and say, you know, and sort of chuckling to himself.
Well, yeah, and you can be, like you say, when you're in this role, you need to have that determined. I remember someone saying, before I'd even started teaching, a friend of mine said, I can't see you as a teacher. And I thought, right, I'm going to be a teacher now.
Yeah.
And I think we have that sort of determination, maybe, don't we?
Yeah.
But yeah. And
to be fair, anything that I've been called online can't be anything worse than I've been called face to face by, you know, various pupils over the years, because, you know, it's challenging. So I kind of, you know, it really, other people's opinion of me is not my business, you know, and what I always come back to is the people that I work with all over the country, all over the world, clearly value what I do, because I get rebooked. They respect what I do, and they're the people that matter. So actually, if someone on social media who doesn't know my work, who's never met me, who doesn't have a clue about what I do, decides to call me the R word, you know, which is really horrible ableist slur, then that says more about them than it does about me. And actually,
and that's one of the great things I've discovered as I've got older. One of the things I've enjoyed is worrying less about what other people think, because I used to worry an awful lot about that.
I think it's human nature. You know, we all want to be liked. So I don't sort of go around thinking, oh, I wonder who I can upset today to make, you know, but if what I will not do and what I cannot do is do something that I know is developmentally inappropriate or is potentially damaging, or, you know, for children's development, in the name of appeasing people or, you know, towing the line. And that's, you know, that has got me into bother a bit with people like the DFE, but I'm not going to stop.
But it's but again, it's that I do feel like there's a political influence as well. We're doing things for a lot of reasons because stuff is coming down from above us saying that, look, we need to do this, and the pressure is more political than it is.
And 'twas ever thus, you know, having lived through various iterations, different governments, you know, more education ministers than I've got digits to count. It's not really, it doesn't really matter which political party is in power. Education is a political act, and you know, there have been good things that have come, you know, good initiatives, and there have been initiatives that I think have been less positive from all different political parties. And what I pride myself on is it doesn't matter which political party is, I'll say how I think it is. And that means maybe I don't get a seat at the table, but do you know what? People come up to me when I'm working, when I'm presenting, when I'm training, or when I'm in a school, and they'll say, thanks ever so much, because you say the stuff that we want to say, but we're not in a position to say it. And I realise that's a privilege for me, because the only person who can sack me is me.
There you go. There you go. You're not answerable.
I am answerable. I am answerable to the children, the families, and the schools that I work with. And if they felt that I was doing something or saying something inappropriate, then they would stop employing me. And that is what I stand by. So, you know, everything that I put out there, I have a mind of, would I want my mother to see this? Would I want my children to see this? Would I want the schools that I work with to see this? Would I want my publishers to see this? Am I happy with that? Yes, I am. Off we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm so flattered that you've come on, Ruth. And I did want to ask you one more thing. We have gone well over an hour. I didn't want to keep you any longer. I'm really, really, really grateful for you giving up your time. It's been really good, and I hope you've
I've enjoyed it. I love a bit of shooting the breeze about education. I'm nerd out on it all the time.
We just like talking shop, don't we? But
love it.
Time is getting on. But I just wanted to ask you, and it relates to the Mossbaum report, and I didn't want to go into that because there's so much to talk about. But it just occurred to me: do you think maybe we might be at a crossroads, in the sense that not parent power, but parents having an input, having an investment, working in partnership with schools? Do you think maybe that shows that maybe we need to listen more, and we need to have a little bit more of a collegiate approach with parents?
I think it's always really tricky, but I think what I always come back to is basic safeguarding. And I suppose, I think we could be in dangerous territory if we are instantly dismissive of people's concerns because they come from an ideological viewpoint that we don't necessarily agree with. And I would say that whatever side of the political spectrum, whatever side of the pedagogical spectrum you are on, basic safeguarding. I was DSL for 17 years. I've been involved in safeguarding reviews and, at local authority level. I've seen colleagues who I thought were really good people who have turned out, unfortunately, to not have the best of intentions. And that is really difficult to see. And I think, having worked with thousands of teachers all over the world over the years, the vast majority of teachers are doing an amazing job, want to do the right thing, but that teachers are human beings. And like all human beings, they're fallible. And within that sector, there will be people who might not necessarily always have children's best intentions at heart. That's not what I'm saying about Mossbaum, but what I'm saying is if we have a culture, because I think, what that report showed was that things may have been done with good intentions, but the impact for some vulnerable children was not positive. And I think that where we get into dangerous territory is where we are dismissive of people's concerns. I think we have a duty to be professionally curious and ask the questions. So this is not about, it's not that binary thing of parents running our schools. That's not going to happen. That's not what we're talking about. But I do think we need to have a culture, and I've been reading a lot around this because I do like to be informed. And I know that the report that Mossbaum commissioned themselves said that actually you do need to look at culture and make sure that parents are feeling heard. And that is really tricky in a large school. I know that. But it's how you manage that and how you manage those relationships. And I just feel that we need to just take a step back, maybe take some heat out of it and think, what is at the heart of this? Always safeguarding trumps everything. And if numerous people are saying, maybe we need to stop and have a little look, maybe we need to think about our practices and consider whether they are always beneficial to all children. Or is there another way? Then I think that's got to be a positive. While I recognise that it's a really difficult thing for people to read about colleagues, for people to read about people they respect. I appreciate that and I understand that. It's
difficult because we know about how important reputation is with schools, but I do agree with you. Safeguarding trumps all of that, and I was quite surprised on the degree of pushback.
Me too, actually. And the stance that I've taken, because I have publicly said safeguarding trumps everything. We always have to have a mindset of it could happen here. I've been involved in enough cases to know that it can happen here. Not personally myself, but where colleagues, it has happened. I had a teacher myself who ended up with a prison sentence. These things do happen, and we're not talking about safeguarding in that sense, but we do have to be mindful that some of the things that we think that maybe don't meet the threshold of what we perceive safeguarding to be, if it is causing harm to children, we need to reflect on that, and we need to ask, is that how we want our children to feel? So I'm certainly not equating what happens and what that review is about with, the kind of safeguarding issues that, we've seen in some cases, but it's a dangerous place to go where we are dismissive of a safeguarding report that follows standard statutory safeguarding procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well said. I think it's just, being inwardly reflective, showing that you're going to listen, and it might
It's
just be
hard.
it is hard, but it might just be a case of adjusting some policies and practices, and just having a little bit of a look into what's going on. But yeah, I think we all need to be prepared for that, and to be inwardly reflective, and to just listen a bit more.
But it is really tricky, and people are stretched. But I just think ultimately, I've been so lucky with my own children's school. They have been absolutely amazing. And, my children have had, quite a tricky time. My daughter lost her dad in the middle of GCSEs, and then has had illness. And I could not fault the way that the school listened to us and worked with us. And that's a very large school. And I just feel that, there are ways, and I watched last night at the A-level award ceremony, I watched teachers and children hugging each other and genuinely delighted to see each other. And I just thought, at the end of the day, it's really tough. Those children, none of us are angels, children or adults. I'm not saying it's easy and straightforward, but those relationships are everything. And, that there are many, many ways to do this. And it's not my job to tell people how to do it, but I do think that I do think we need to be reflective. That's all. Just to say, well, perhaps, is there a different way? Do we have to be like that? That's the question. It's not my job to say that to people that, you must do this, you must do that. But I do think that part of my job as an improvement advisor with the schools that I work with is to expect them to be professionally curious. And yes, I look mostly at pedagogy, but safeguarding is always at the heart of all the work I do.
100%. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think that might be a good sort of place to leave it. But it is, teaching is a real, fantastic job, isn't it? It's a privilege.
But it's tricky. It's not hard. Easy, 20 really years at the chalk face, I've got lines.
But when you do have those results, and those, things go well, it just makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So people contacted me only the other day to say thank you, and you think, you do make a difference to people. It shapes children's lives.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I just want to say thank you so much to Ruth for coming on. Like I said, I had a look at a post that Ruth put up earlier with their schedule on, and this has been the end of what looks like an extremely long day. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio here on the Twilight Show. Thanks to everyone who's been watching along. I hope there's been something in there. I certainly feel like I've learned an awful lot, and I'm going to go away and reflect about those things that we've talked about. But guys, we're nearly there. We've nearly made it to Christmas.
Yeah.
You might see the Christmas tree up there behind me, which I
haven't got there yet.
No, I was quite early with mine this year, to be honest. I'm becoming one of those irritating people who start putting decorations up right early in December. Not November yet, but December. But I won't see you guys now until after Christmas. So Merry Christmas to everyone, and a very Happy New Year. And the same to you, Ruth. Hopefully we'll see you again in the new year. Keep up the amazing work. And thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Right.
Thank you.
So good night to everyone. Have a restful evening, and I'll see you in the new year. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Outstanding and world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused